The transport ship hummed quietly as it moved through space toward the training world. Lieutenant Tae-min Park sat in the corner of the passenger area, watching the stars through the small window. He was not nervous, but he was curious. This was the first time humans had been invited to join the Galactic Council's survival training program. Across from him sat his training partner, a being called Veltar. The alien was tall and thin, with gray skin that looked like smooth stone. 4. Arms moved constantly as Veltar read through training manuals on a glowing tablet. Every few minutes, the alien would make small clicking sounds which Tae-min had learned meant agreement or understanding. "The protocols are very clear," Veltar said in perfect but mechanical-sounding English. "We will have exactly 24 hours to construct adequate shelter and survive on Koros 7. The success rate for new species is only 37%. Tae-min nodded politely. He had read the same reports. Most teams barely lasted 12 hours before activating their emergency beacons for rescue. The training world was designed to be difficult. Dense forests, dangerous animals, sudden weather changes, and plants that could kill you if you touched them wrong. "Have you completed survival training before?" Veltar asked, looking up from the tablet with large, dark eyes that never seemed to blink. "Some," Tae-min replied. He did not mention that he had spent 2 years in the Amazon rainforest, 3 months in the Arctic, and had completed every survival course the Earth military offered. He had learned that aliens often became uncomfortable when humans described their experiences. Earth was considered an unusually dangerous world by galactic standards. The ship's captain, a friendly creature with tentacles instead of arms, announced they would arrive soon. Through the window, Tae-min could see Koros 7 growing larger. It looked like Earth from space, blue and green and covered with white clouds, but he knew the similarities ended there. "I have studied the recommended shelter designs," Veltar continued, showing Tae-min pictures on the tablet. "The standard emergency shelter requires 17 specific components and can be assembled in 4 hours and 22 minutes by a big, trained team." The pictures showed a low, rectangular structure made from salvaged materials. It looked solid and practical. It also looked exactly like every other emergency shelter Tae-min had seen in the Galactic survival manuals. "What about local conditions?" Tae-min asked. "Local conditions?" Veltar's head tilted slightly. "The protocols account for standard environmental variables: temperature range, precipitation probability, wind patterns, all calculated and prepared for." "What about the animals, the plants?" "Avoidance is recommended. The shelter is designed to minimize detection by local life forms." Tae-min looked out the window again. Below them, Koros 7's surface was covered in what looked like thick green forest. He could see storms moving across one continent like slow, gray giants. Lightning flashed inside the clouds, but it seemed wrong somehow, too bright and too low to the ground. The ship began its descent. Tae-min felt the familiar weight of gravity pulling at him as they entered the atmosphere. He closed his eyes and let his mind wander to other forests he had known, the sounds they made, the smells, the way light filtered through leaves differently in each place, the way animals moved when they felt safe versus when they sensed danger. "You seem very calm," Veltar observed. The alien's 4 hands had stopped. Moving, which Tae-min had learned meant Veltar was paying close attention. "I like forests," Tae-min said simply. "This is not a forest for pleasure. This is a hostile environment designed to test our limits." "Every forest is hostile if you fight it," Tae-min replied. "But if you listen to it first, sometimes it will teach you how to live there." Veltar made a different clicking sound, one that meant confusion or disagreement. "Environments do not teach. They simply exist. We must impose our will upon them to survive." The ship touched down with a gentle bump. Through the window, Tae-min could see tall trees with thick trunks and broad leaves. Vines hung between them, like natural ropes. In the distance, he could hear sounds. Bird calls, maybe, or something like them. The air outside looked thick and humid. "Final preparations," announced the captain. "You will be transported to your starting location shortly. Remember, this is a survival exercise. Your shuttle will be damaged and unable to fly. You must work together to survive 24 hours. Help will come when the time is completed, but not before, unless you activate your emergency beacon." Other teams were also preparing. Taemin could see pairs of aliens checking their equipment and reviewing their plans. Everyone looked serious and worried. Most had brought extra supplies and tools, which was allowed by the rules. Taemin carried only a small pack with basic items, a knife, some rope, water purification tablets, and a few energy bars. Veltar had a much larger pack filled with tools and materials for shelter construction. "Do you not wish to bring more equipment?" Veltar asked, looking at Taemin's small pack. "The forest will provide what I need. The forest is not your ally. It contains numerous dangerous species and toxic plants. The manual lists 47 specific threats we must avoid." Did the manual also list the 47 ways the forest will try to help us? Another confused clicking sound from Veltar. They boarded the small shuttle that would take them to their starting point. The pilot, a cheerful alien with bright yellow skin, hummed a tune as they flew low over the forest canopy. Taemin watched the trees carefully. He could see how they grew, which ones preferred sunlight, which ones grew in shade, how they bent with the wind. There were clearings here and there, and streams that reflected sunlight like silver ribbons. "Beginning descent to crash site," the pilot announced with a laugh. "Please prepare for emergency landing simulation." The shuttle shook and made loud warning sounds as they came down. Taemin braced himself as they hit the ground harder than necessary. Smoke began filling the cabin from hidden machines. "Go, go, go!" the pilot shouted cheerfully. "Your shuttle is critically damaged. 24 hours starts now." Taemin and Veltar ran out of the shuttle into the forest clearing. The air was warm and heavy with moisture. It smelled of growing things and earth and something sweet he could not identify. Around them, the forest rose like green walls, thick with plants and shadows. Veltar immediately began examining the damaged shuttle, pulling out twisted metal pieces and broken panels. "We must salvage what we can," the alien said. "The protocols require us to catalog all available materials before beginning construction." But Taemin was not looking at the shuttle. He was looking up through the gap in the trees where the shuttle had fallen. High above, the forest canopy spread out like a green roof. He could see strong branches and the way they connected to each other. He could hear the wind moving through leaves and feel how it changed direction as it hit different levels of the forest. "Taemin," Veltar called. "We must begin the salvage operation." "In a moment," Taemin replied, still looking up. "I am listening to the forest. It has something to tell us." Veltar worked quickly and efficiently, just as the training manual instructed. The alien pulled pieces of metal from the crashed shuttle and arranged them in neat piles. Broken panels, bent supports, torn fabric from the seats, pieces of wire, and tubing. Everything was sorted by size and potential usefulness. "According to the manual, we have sufficient materials for a Class B emergency shelter," Veltar announced after 30 minutes of cataloging. "The construction should take approximately 4 hours if we follow the standard procedures." Taemin walked slowly around the clearing, looking at everything but the shuttle parts. He knelt down and touched the soil, then rubbed it between his fingers. He picked up a fallen leaf and examined its shape and texture. He stood very still for several minutes, just listening to the sounds of the forest. "Taemin, we must begin construction immediately," Veltar said, holding up the tablet, displaying shelter blueprints. "The longer we delay, the greater our risk of exposure to nocturnal predators." Taemin replied, but he was looking up at the trees again. About 40 feet above the ground, thick branches stretched between several large trees. The branches were wide enough to walk on and formed natural platforms in some places. Vines hung down like ready-made ropes. While Veltar began laying out metal pieces according to the shelter diagram, Taemin started gathering different materials. He collected long, flexible vines and tested their strength by pulling on them. He found branches that had fallen but were still strong and straight. He gathered broad leaves that felt waxy and waterproof. Those materials are not listed in the approved construction guidelines, Veltar pointed out. The standard shelter uses salvage technology components, not organic materials. I know, Taemin said, coiling a particularly strong vine around his arm. But I am not building a standard shelter. What do you mean? The protocols are clear. We must construct a ground-level emergency shelter in the designated safe zone. Taemin looked at the clearing around them. It was convenient and flat, perfect for building. It was also the most obvious place for any hunting animal to look for prey. The crashed shuttle would attract attention. The scent of aliens would linger. In the open air, any light or heat from their shelter would be visible from a long distance. This clearing is not safe, Taemin said. It is a trap. A trap? But it is the designated safe zone according to our maps. Safe for landing a shuttle, maybe. Not safe for spending the night. Taemin walked to the largest tree at the edge of the clearing. Its trunk was massive, easily 6 feet across, and the bark was rough with deep grooves that would provide good handholds for climbing. He looked up and traced the path of branches with his eyes, planning his route. "Where are you?" "Going," Veltar asked, watching Taemin begin to climb. "Up," Taemin replied, pulling himself onto the first large branch. Climbing was easy. The tree was old and strong, with branches placed perfectly for moving from one to another. As Taemin climbed higher, he could see more of the forest around them. The canopy was thick and solid, like a second ground 40 feet above the forest floor. Branches from different trees intertwined and connected, creating natural highways through the air. When he reached the level where the branches were thickest, Taemin stopped and looked around carefully. This was perfect. The branches here were strong enough to support a structure. They were high enough to be above most ground-dwelling predators. The thick canopy above would hide them from flying creatures and protect them from rain. Air moved freely at this level, which would carry away their scent. "Taemin!" Veltar called from below. "You must return immediately! This is not following protocol." "I will be back down soon," Taemin called back. "I am just looking at something." But he was doing more than looking. He was selecting the perfect spot and planning his construction. 3 trees grew close together here, their branches forming a natural triangle. The space between them was large enough for a comfortable shelter, but small enough to span easily with the materials he had gathered. Taemin climbed back down, carrying several strong branches he had found dead but solid in the upper canopy. When he reached the ground, he found Veltar standing next to a half-built metal shelter that looked exactly like the picture in the manual. "I have completed 30% of the construction," Veltar reported. "If you assist me, we can finish in 3 hours." "That looks very sturdy," Taemin said, and he meant it. Veltar was skilled at following instructions and building exactly what the plans required. "Thank you. Now please help me install the support framework." Instead of helping, Taemin gathered his collected vines and branches. He also took some of the fabric from the shuttle seats and a few pieces of thin metal that would work as tools. "What are you doing?" Veltar asked, watching Taemin prepare to climb the tree again. "Building a shelter." "But the shelter is here." Veltar gestured at the half-completed metal structure. "That is your shelter," Taemin said kindly. "I am building mine up there." He pointed up into the trees. Veltar followed his gaze and made several rapid clicking, sounds that indicated extreme confusion. "Up there? In the trees? That is not safe. That is not following any known survival protocol." "Maybe not. Taemin agreed. But it will work. Taemin began his second climb, this time carrying materials. The vines were easy to transport. He could coil them around his body. The branches were more difficult, but he managed by carrying a few at a time. On his third trip up, he brought the fabric and metal tools. From below, Veltar watched in growing alarm as Taemin began what looked like impossible construction work 40 feet above the ground. The human moved from branch to branch with ease, tying vines between trees and lashing branches together to form a framework. "This is highly dangerous," Veltar called up. "If you fall, you will be seriously injured." "I will not fall," Taemin replied calmly, testing the strength of a vine connection. "I have done this before." What Veltar could not see clearly from the ground was how cleverly Taemin was building. The human had created a platform by lashing branches between the three trees, using the natural strength of the living branches to support his construction. Over this platform, he was weaving together broad leaves and pieces of fabric to make walls and a roof. The design was nothing like the standard emergency shelter. Instead of being a solid box, it was flexible and organic. It moved slightly with the wind instead of fighting it. It was camouflaged among the leaves and branches, almost invisible from below. Most importantly, it was positioned exactly where air currents would carry away their scent and where the thick canopy would hide any light. By the time the sun began to set, Veltar had completed the standard shelter according to specifications. It was solid, weatherproof, and equipped with all the recommended safety features. It stood in the middle of the clearing like a small metal house, easily visible and clearly artificial. 40 feet above, Taemin was putting the finishing touches on his treehouse. He had created a comfortable space with a sleeping area, storage for supplies, and even a small area where rainwater would collect for drinking. The whole structure swayed gently with the movement of the trees, like a ship riding calm waves. "Taemin!" Veltar called as darkness began to fall. "You must come down now. It is not safe to be in the trees at night." "It is safer up here than down there," Taemin replied. "You should come up." "Come up? Into the trees? That is impossible. I am not built for climbing." "I can help you," Taemin offered. He had already thought of this problem and prepared a solution. Using vines and pieces of metal from the shuttle, he had created a simple pulley system that could lift someone from the ground. "The protocols do not recommend elevated shelters," Veltar said firmly. "They are considered too risky." "Protocols cannot account for every situation," Taemin replied. "Sometimes you must adapt." As full darkness fell, the forest around them began to change. New sounds emerged from the shadows, rustling, clicking, and calls that neither of them had heard during the day. Something large moved through the trees nearby, causing branches to shake. In the clearing below, Veltar's metal shelter stood out like a beacon, reflecting the last traces of light from the sky. The alien huddled inside, following protocol by staying silent and motionless. High above, Taemin sat comfortably in his treehouse, listening to the night sounds and learning what they meant. He was not afraid. He was exactly where he needed to be. The forest at night was completely different from the forest during the day. As darkness settled over Koros 7, new sounds emerged from every direction, clicking, whistling, rustling, and calls that seemed to echo from tree to tree. The air itself felt different, thicker, more alive with movement and presence. From his treehouse, Taemin listened carefully to each sound. Some were clearly birds or bird-like creatures settling in for the night. Others were harder to identify. There was a low humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and occasional sharp cracks that might have been branches breaking, or might have been something else entirely. Below in the clearing, Veltar sat inside the metal shelter, following the manual's instructions for nighttime survival. All openings were sealed except for small air vents. No lights were permitted. Movement was to be kept to absolute minimum. The alien held a small device that monitored the area outside for signs of dangerous life forms. "Time in," Veltar whispered, through the shelter's communication port. "I am reading multiple large life forms moving around the perimeter. You should come down immediately." "I can see them," Taemin replied quietly from above. And he could. His eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and his elevated position gave him a view of the entire clearing. Shapes moved between the trees. Large, low forms that seemed to flow rather than walk. They moved with purpose, circling the clearing but not entering it yet. "What are they?" Veltar asked, checking the readings on the device again. "The scanner indicates they are approximately 2 meters long and emit low-level thermal signatures." "Shadow Stalkers," Taemin said, remembering the name from the training briefings. "The manual said they hunt by vibration and heat signatures." "Yes. The protocols recommend remaining motionless until they lose interest and move on." But the creatures were not losing interest. If anything, they seemed increasingly focused on the clearing. More shapes appeared from different directions, all moving with the same flowing, purposeful motion. They were attracted to something specific. From his position in the trees, Taemin could see what Veltar could not. The metal shelter was radiating heat differently from the surrounding forest floor. Even though Veltar was trying to minimize thermal output, the alien's body heat was being conducted through the metal walls and creating a warm spot that stood out clearly against the cooler ground. Worse, every small movement Veltar made inside. The shelter created vibrations that traveled through the metal structure into the ground. To the Shadow Stalkers, it was like a dinner bell ringing every few seconds. "Veltar," Taemin said softly, "you need to come up here. Now." "That is not possible. The manual clearly states that abandoning prepared shelter during predator activity is extremely dangerous. The shelter is what is attracting them." "That cannot be correct. The shelter is designed to minimize detection." But even as Veltar spoke, the Shadow Stalkers moved closer. They were no longer circling. They were approaching the metal shelter directly. In the darkness, Taemin could see their sleek forms, and the way they moved without sound across the forest floor. "Veltar, listen to me carefully," Taemin said, his voice calm but urgent. "I am going to lower a rope. When I tell you, open the shelter and grab the rope. Do not think about it, just do it. This is against all protocols." "The protocols did not account for Shadow Stalkers that hunt by heat and vibration," Taemin interrupted. "Trust me." Taemin quickly activated the pulley system he had built. A vine rope dropped down from the treehouse to land just outside the shelter's door. It was thin and flexible, making almost no sound as it touched the ground. The Shadow Stalkers had reached the edge of the clearing. Up close, they were even more unsettling than the training videos had suggested. They moved like liquid darkness, with no visible eyes or features, just smooth forms that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Now, Veltar!" The alien hesitated for a moment, then training and survival instinct took over. Veltar opened the shelter door and lunged for the rope. 4 hands gripped it tightly just as the Shadow Stalkers surged forward toward the heat signature they had been tracking. Taemin pulled the pulley system hand over hand, lifting Veltar up into the trees just as the creatures reached the abandoned shelter. The metal structure was immediately surrounded by flowing dark forms that seemed to pour over it like water. "Keep climbing," Taemin urged, as Veltar swayed on the rope 20 feet above ground. "Use the knots I tied in the rope." Veltar climbed with desperate efficiency, 4 arms working together to pull up toward safety. Behind and below, the Shadow Stalkers investigated the empty shelter, moving through it and around it in patterns that suggested confusion and frustration. When Veltar finally reached the treehouse platform, the alien was shaking, whether from fear, exertion, or shock. Taemin could not tell. "Maybe all 3. How did you know?" Veltar gasped, collapsing onto the woven platform. How did you know they would be attracted to the shelter? The metal conducted your body heat to the ground, Taemin explained, helping Veltar move to the most stable part of the platform. And every time you moved, the vibrations went through the frame into the earth. To creatures that hunt by heat and vibration, you were broadcasting your location constantly. But the protocols, the manual said the shelter would provide protection. The manual was written by people who never met shadow stalkers, Taemin said gently. Sometimes experience matters more than instructions. Veltar looked around the treehouse with new appreciation. The structure swayed gently with the natural movement of the trees, absorbing and dissipating any vibrations rather than transmitting them. The organic materials did not conduct heat the way metal did, and 40 feet above the ground they were completely outside the hunting range of ground-dwelling predators. This is remarkable, Veltar said slowly. You built this without following any manual or protocol. I followed the protocol of the forest, Taemin replied. Trees have been solving the problem of staying safe at night for millions of years. I just asked them to teach me. Below them, the shadow stalkers had finished investigating the empty shelter and were beginning to disperse. They moved away from the clearing in different directions, flowing back into the forest like darkness returning to darkness. Will they come back? Veltar asked. Maybe, but not up here. Taemin had positioned the treehouse carefully, choosing trees whose bark contained natural oils that many predators found unpleasant. He had also woven certain leaves into the walls, leaves he had observed local herbivores avoiding, which suggested they contained chemicals that would confuse or repel hunters. How do you know which leaves to use, which trees to choose? I watched the animals during the day, Taemin explained. I saw which plants they ate and which ones they avoided. I noticed which trees had claw marks from climbing creatures and which ones did not. The forest tells you everything you need to know if you know how to listen. Veltar was quiet for a long time, processing this information. The alien had spent years studying survival protocols and procedures, memorizing exactly what to do in dozens of different emergency situations. But none of those procedures had included learning from the environment itself. On my world, Veltar said eventually, survival means following established procedures that have been tested and proven safe. We do not improvise or adapt. We follow the plan. What happens when the plan does not work? We activate emergency protocols and call for rescue. And if rescue cannot come? Veltar had no answer for that. The treehouse was remarkably comfortable. Taemin had created a sleeping area using soft branches and fabric with natural depressions that fit their bodies perfectly. There was storage space for supplies, and rainwater was already beginning to collect in a system of broad leaves that Taemin had positioned to catch moisture from the air. You should rest, Taemin suggested. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. Will you sleep also? In a while. First, I want to listen to the night sounds and learn what else is out there. Veltar settled into the sleeping area, still amazed at how secure the treehouse felt despite being suspended 40 feet above the ground. The swaying motion was actually soothing, like being rocked gently. The sounds of the forest, which had seemed threatening from inside the metal shelter, now seemed like a protective blanket of natural activity. Taemin sat at the edge of the platform, listening to the night. He could hear the shadow stalkers moving through the distant forest. But they were hunting elsewhere now. There were flying creatures calling to each other from tree to tree. Somewhere far off, something large was moving through water, probably a stream or small lake. All of this information was useful. The flying creatures would tell him if dangerous predators were approaching from the air. The water sounds would help him find fresh drinking water tomorrow. Even the shadow stalkers were providing information about safe paths through the forest floor. The forest was not his enemy. It was a complex system full of information and resources, ready to help anyone who knew how to ask for assistance. As the night deepened, Veltar fell asleep to the gentle swaying of the trees and the peaceful sounds of the forest. Above them, stars appeared through breaks in the canopy, providing just enough light to see the shapes of branches and leaves. Taemin woke before dawn, as he always did in new places. The forest sounds had changed during the night, telling him that day creatures were beginning to stir while night hunters were settling into rest. Beside him, Veltar slept peacefully. On the woven platform, 4 arms curled around the alien's body for warmth. The air felt different, heavier. There was a pressure that made Taemin's ears feel slightly blocked, and the wind patterns through the trees had shifted. He sat up carefully and looked out through the canopy toward the sky. Dark clouds were building on the horizon, but they were not normal storm clouds. These were thick and low with a strange greenish tint that seemed to pulse with internal light. Lightning flickered inside them, but the flashes were too bright and too sustained, lasting several seconds instead of brief moments. Taemin had read about Korra 7's thermal storms in the briefing materials. They were one of the planet's most dangerous features, electrical storms that brought lightning to ground level, turning the forest floor into a deadly maze of electrical discharge. Most survival manuals recommended finding deep underground shelter and waiting for the storms to pass. But Taemin was beginning to understand that the survival manuals had been written by people who thought in terms of fighting the environment rather than working with it. "Veltar," he said gently, touching the alien's shoulder. "Wake up. We need to prepare for a storm." Veltar's large dark eyes opened immediately. Military training, apparently, was similar across species. "What kind of storm?" the alien asked, sitting up and looking around. "Thermal storm. It will be here in a few hours." Veltar pulled out the portable scanner and checked the readings. "Atmospheric pressure dropping rapidly. Electrical activity increasing." "Yes, you are correct. How did you know without instruments?" The air pressure, the way the wind changed direction, the sounds the birds made when they went quiet. The alien looked around at the treehouse with new concern. "We should descend and find underground shelter. The manual states that elevated positions are extremely dangerous during electrical storms. Underground shelter would be safer from lightning," Taemin agreed. "But we are not going to be struck by lightning up here." "How can you be certain?" Taemin pointed to the storm clouds, which were growing darker and more ominous by the minute. "Look at the height of those clouds. Look at how the lightning moves inside them. This is not regular lightning that comes down from the sky." Veltar studied the approaching storm more carefully. The lightning was indeed strange. It moved horizontally, through the clouds rather than striking downward, and it had that peculiar greenish color that did not look natural. "Ground lightning," Taemin explained. "The electrical field builds up in the lower atmosphere and discharges horizontally across the surface. It will turn the forest floor into an electrical field, but it will not reach this high." "How do you know this?" "Because I have seen similar storms on Earth. Different cause, same effect. The discharge follows the path of least resistance, which is always along the ground where moisture and minerals create natural conductors." As if to prove his point, the first test bolts began to appear. Green-white lightning arced between trees, at ground level, creating a crackling web of electricity that lasted for several seconds before fading. The air filled with the smell of ozone and burning vegetation. "We need to secure the treehouse," Taemin said, moving to check the vine connections that held their shelter together. "This storm will bring high winds and heavy rain." Veltar helped him tighten the lashings and reinforce weak points in the structure. The alien was good at following directions and had steady hands for detail work. Together, they made the treehouse, stronger and more stable. "Why did you build here?" Veltar asked as they worked. "At this exact height?" "Lightning likes to follow the easiest path," Taemin explained. "Ground level has the most moisture and the best conductivity. The very top of the trees will be the highest points, so regular lightning from above would strike there first. But this height," he gestured around them, is above the ground discharge but below the treetops. It is the safest place to be. The storm arrived faster than expected. One moment the forest was filled with the normal sounds of morning, and the next moment the air was crackling with electricity. Green lightning began racing between trees at ground level, creating a web of energy that turned the entire forest floor into a danger zone. Where Veltar's abandoned metal shelter had stood, the electrical discharge was particularly intense. The metal structure conducted electricity like a beacon, attracting bolt after bolt until it glowed white-hot and began to melt. "My shelter," Veltar said, watching the destruction. "Would have killed us," Taemin replied matter-of-factly. "Metal conducts electricity. Wood and living trees absorb it and dissipate it safely." As if to demonstrate his point, lightning struck one of the massive tree trunks that supported their shelter. Instead of exploding or catching fire, the tree simply absorbed the electrical energy and channeled it harmlessly into the ground through its root system. The treehouse swayed slightly with the impact, but remained completely safe. Rain began to fall, not gentle drops, but heavy sheets of water that came down like a waterfall. Taemin had prepared for this too. The roof of the treehouse was designed to shed water quickly while catching some of it for drinking. Broad leaves channeled rainwater into containers made from more leaves and pieces of fabric. "You planned for this," Veltar said, watching water collect in their improvised rain-catching system. "I planned for rain," Taemin corrected. "The electrical storm was unexpected, but the principles are the same. Work with the environment instead of fighting it." The storm raged for hours. Lightning continued to arc across the ground level, creating an almost constant display of green and white energy. The rain fell so heavily that they could barely see beyond the nearest trees. Wind whipped through the canopy, making the treehouse sway dramatically, but the flexible construction bent without breaking. During the worst of the storm, Taemin pulled out some of the emergency food bars from his pack and shared them with Veltar. But he also produced something else. Small, protein-rich insects he had collected the day before. "You want me to eat insects?" Veltar asked, looking at the creatures with obvious reluctance. "They are safe. I watched which ones the local birds eat. Birds and insects have similar dietary requirements to many spacefaring species. How do you know which birds to trust? Birds that eat poisonous insects die quickly and obviously. I observed for several hours yesterday and noted which insects were eaten safely and which were avoided." Veltar tried one of the insects and was surprised to find it tasted pleasant, slightly nutty with a texture similar to familiar protein foods. "This is not unpleasant." "Survival is not about suffering," Taemin said. "It is about adapting. If you can adapt well enough, survival becomes comfortable living." As the storm continued, Veltar began to see other details of how cleverly the treehouse was designed. The swaying motion that had seemed dangerous at first was actually keeping them stable. The flexibility prevented the structure from fighting the wind and potentially breaking. The organic materials stayed strong even when wet, unlike metal, which could become slippery and dangerous. Water collected not just for drinking but also for washing. Taemin had created a small drainage system that would carry wastewater away from their living area. There were storage spaces for supplies, areas that stayed dry even in the driving rain, and even a section that could be used as a workshop for making tools or repairs. "This is not a survival shelter," Veltar realized. "This is a home." "What is the difference?" Taemin asked. "A shelter is temporary, something to endure until rescue comes. A home is a place where you belong." "Exactly." Outside, emergency beacons began activating across the training area. Other teams, caught in ground-level shelters during the electrical storm, were calling for immediate rescue. The standard survival protocols had no answer for ground lightning that could last for hours. But in the treehouse, Taemin and Veltar were warm, dry, and comfortable. They had fresh water, food, and secure shelter, The storm that was defeating other teams was actually making their situation better by providing resources and demonstrating the wisdom of their elevated position. "How many other teams do you think are calling for rescue?" Veltar asked, watching another distress beacon activate in the distance. "Most of them," Taemin replied. "Standard shelters are not designed for this type of storm. But we are not just surviving. We are thriving. Yes. This is not normal human survival behavior, is it?" Taemin considered the question. "Humans do not just survive hostile environments. We make hostile environments into homes. It is what we do." The storm began to weaken as afternoon approached. The lightning became less frequent and less intense. The rain reduced from torrential downpour to steady shower to occasional drips. Birds began calling again from the upper canopy, signaling that the danger was passing. When the storm finally ended, the forest floor was transformed. Where there had been undergrowth and fallen leaves, there were now charred patches and small fires that smoldered in the humid air. The electrical discharge had cleared much of the ground-level vegetation, making it easier to see between the trees. Dawn revealed a transformed landscape. The thermal storm had cleared much of the underbrush from the forest floor, leaving behind a patchwork of charred earth and smoldering vegetation. In the distance, pillars of smoke rose from various locations, where other survival teams had been forced to activate their emergency beacons during the night. From their elevated position in the treehouse, Taemin and Veltar could see across the forest to where rescue shuttles were landing and taking off, collecting participants whose standard shelters had failed during the electrical storm. The steady stream of evacuations confirmed what Taemin had suspected. The survival protocols taught by the Galactic Council were designed for normal weather, not for the extreme conditions that made Koros 7 a genuine survival challenge. 17. Emergency activations, Veltar reported, checking the communication device. Out of 43 teams that started the exercise. More will follow, Taemin predicted. The storm damaged their shelters and used up their emergency supplies. They will struggle to complete the remaining 8 hours. But Taemin was not struggling. If anything, he seemed more comfortable and energetic than when the exercise had begun. While Veltar had spent the night worried about survival, Taemin had spent it learning from the forest and improving their situation. The storm had brought unexpected benefits. The rainwater collection system was now full of clean, fresh water, more than they could use in days. The electrical activity had driven ground-dwelling predators to shelter, leaving the forest floor temporarily safe for exploration. Most importantly, the cleared undergrowth made it easier to see useful plants and materials that had been hidden before. "I want to show you something," Taemin said, preparing to climb down from the treehouse. "The storm has revealed new opportunities." "Is it safe to go to ground level?" Veltar asked, looking nervously at the charred landscape below. "Safe enough. The shadow stalkers will be resting during daylight, and other predators will be cautious after the storm. We will not go far, and we will watch carefully." Taemin had already prepared for this expedition. During the night, while listening to the storm, he had been working on additional equipment. Using vines and pieces of metal from the crashed shuttle, he had created a simple but effective tool for gathering resources safely. Veltar watched with fascination as Taemin demonstrated the tool, a long pole with a hook on one end and a small basket on the other. It could be used to reach plants and materials from a safe distance, testing them before direct contact. "You made this during the storm?" Veltar asked. "There was time between lightning strikes," Taemin replied casually. "I do not like to waste time." They descended from the treehouse using the pulley system, which Taemin had improved during the night. The rope now had knots and loops that made climbing easier, and he had added a simple brake system that controlled the speed of descent. On the forest floor, the changes were even more dramatic. The electrical discharge had not just cleared vegetation. It had also exposed things that had been buried or hidden. Taemin immediately began collecting items that would be useful: salt deposits left behind by evaporated water, clay soil perfect for making containers, and various plants that had been protected from the electricity by growing in rocky crevices. How? Do you know which plants are safe? Veltar asked, watching Taemin carefully examine different species. Same way I learned about the insects, Taemin replied. I watch what the local animals eat and avoid, but also, I test carefully. He demonstrated a technique of touching a small amount of plant material to his lips, then waiting to see if there was any burning or numbness before proceeding. That seems dangerous. Less dangerous than starving, and much less dangerous than eating something poisonous because you did not test it properly. They found several varieties of edible plants, including some with roots that could be cooked into nutritious starch, and others with leaves that had a pleasant, slightly spicy flavor. Taemin also located a patch of clay that was perfect for making simple pottery, and a natural spring that had been revealed when the storm cleared away covering vegetation. This spring was here all along? Veltar asked, watching clear water bubble up from between rocks. Yes. The sound told me it was nearby, but I could not locate it exactly until the storm cleared the plants. Taemin cupped his hands and tasted the water carefully. Good. Clean and mineral-rich. By midday, they had returned to the treehouse with an impressive collection of resources. Taemin set to work immediately, showing Veltar how to process the materials they had gathered. The clay could be shaped into containers and hardened by the heat from small fires. The edible roots could be cooked and stored for later meals. The leaves could be woven into additional waterproofing for the shelter or dried to make a pleasant tea-like drink. You are not just surviving, Veltar observed, watching Taemin work with practiced efficiency. You are building a civilization. Humans do not survive places, Taemin replied, shaping clay into a water storage jar. We make places livable. It is how we spread across an entire planet that was trying to kill us. Your planet was trying to kill you? Earth is not a gentle world. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, storms, droughts, floods, predators, diseases, poisonous plants, extreme climates. Humans learn to survive in all of these conditions not by running away, but by adapting and making each environment into a home. As the afternoon progressed, the treehouse continued to evolve. Taemin added a cooking area where small fires could be safely maintained for preparing food. He created a workshop space where tools could be made and repaired. He even established a small garden area where useful plants could be grown. Veltar helped with all of these projects, learning techniques that were never mentioned in any survival manual. How to weave plant fibers into strong rope. How to identify which stones would hold heat for cooking and which would crack. How to read the behavior of insects and birds to predict weather changes. These skills, Veltar said, practicing the rope-weaving technique. Where did you learn them? From many places. Military survival training, yes, but also from studying how humans lived before technology, and from watching how other species adapt to their environments. Other species? Birds build nests that survive storms. Bees create structures that maintain perfect temperature and humidity. Ants build cities with ventilation and food storage. Every species has solved survival problems. Humans just learn to copy the best solutions from everyone. During the afternoon, more emergency beacons activated across the forest. The participants who had survived the storm were now facing the challenge of completing their exercise with damaged equipment and depleted supplies. From their elevated position, Taemin and Veltar could see the smoke from signal fires and the lights from distress beacons. Should we offer to help them? Veltar asked, watching another rescue shuttle arrive in the distance. They would not. Accept help from someone who ignored the protocols, Taemin replied, and their instructors would not approve of our methods. But our methods work better. Yes, but that does not mean others will want to learn them. As evening approached, Taemin began preparing for their second night on Koro 7. But this preparation was very different from the desperate scramble that other teams were experiencing. Instead of struggling to survive until rescue, he was improving their living situation and planning for future comfort. He created a better sleeping area using the clay containers to store warm water that would provide heat through the night. He established a food storage system that would keep their supplies fresh and protected from insects. He even set up a simple alarm system using hanging objects that would make noise if large animals approached their tree. "Tomorrow is our last day," Veltar said, settling into the improved sleeping area as darkness fell. "Yes. I do not want to leave." Taemin looked out through the canopy at the stars beginning to appear overhead. The forest sounds were familiar now. He could identify most of the creatures by their calls and knew which ones indicated safety and which ones meant potential danger. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But that is not the point of the exercise." "What is the point?" "To learn, to prove that different approaches can work, to show that survival is not about enduring hardship. It is about adapting so well that hardship becomes comfort." "Do you think the instructors will understand?" "Some will. Others will see only that we broke their rules and ignored their protocols. And which group matters more?" Taemin considered this question as he listened to the peaceful sounds of the forest around them. Above them, the canopy swayed gently in the night breeze. Below them, the forest floor was quiet and safe. Around them, their treehouse provided comfort and security that surpassed anything the standard survival protocols could offer. "The ones who want to learn," he said finally, "those are the ones who matter." As the second night settled over Koros 7, emergency beacons continued to activate across the forest. More teams called for rescue rather than face another night with inadequate shelter and dwindling supplies. The survival exercise that was supposed to test interspecies cooperation was turning into a series of emergency evacuations.